All right, so let's get right into it today. Maria Sharapova's induction into the Hall of Fame. It's been causing a lot of buzz. Some strong opinions out there.
Yeah, definitely a hot topic. You've got, a career with tons of highlight reel moments, but then there's also the doping controversy. It really makes you think about what it means to be in the Hall of Fame.
It
Yeah.
really does. So we're going to take a deep dive today into Sharapova's whole career, the highs, the lows, and really try to figure out what her induction says about what we value in sports.
I think it's fascinating how Sharapova's story makes us think about what it really means to be a champion, on and off the court, of course.
Absolutely. Okay, so to really get the set, we got to rewind a bit. I remember watching the 2002 Wimbledon Junior Girls Final. This 15-year-old Sharapova was already turning heads. Her
Yeah.
intensity and her, well, let's just say her unique style.
Unique is one way to put it. That grunts those rituals. Not your typical tennis player.
No, not at all. You remember that whole routine? She'd walk to the back fence before every serve, like gather herself, spin back with that left fist clenched, then bam, that powerful serve. It was almost like a performance.
And it's interesting because her style, as polarizing as it was for some, had a huge impact on the game, on her opponents and the next generation of players. Some players were just thrown off by
Yeah.
it, some even intimidating. Others saw it as this display of pure focus, pure determination. And a lot of young players started copying those same rituals. Love it or hate it, she set a trend.
And then just 2 years later, bam, she beats Serena Williams in the 2004 Wimbledon final, only 17 years old at the time.
Talk about a turning point, not just for Sharapova, but for women's tennis in general. It was the start of a new era of powerful, intense female athletes who weren't afraid to express themselves on the court. And Sharapova was leading the way.
That win launched her into superstardom. She became a global icon on and off the court. 21 weeks at number one, 36 titles, including every single Grand Slam. Not just winning, but completely dominating the French Open. Twice transforming her game to master clay. When you think about it, it's insane. It really speaks to her adaptability and drive.
Absolutely. And speaking of drive, let's not forget her record in those marathon matches. Right. Those grueling back and forth battles that really tested her physically and mentally. That refusal to give up that fighting spirit, that's what really set her apart.
Even when she lost, especially against Serena Williams, she always showed this incredible respect and sportsmanship.
Totally. It takes a lot of character to keep that grace and resilience, especially when you're consistently losing to a dominant rival. She wasn't afraid to poke fun at herself either. Remember that time after a tough loss to Caroline Wozniacki? She joked about not having the guts to smash her racket. Sure, she could step back and find humor even in defeat.
That ability to bounce back, to learn from those losses, that's a key part of her story. But then in 2016, that doping controversy hits, and it casts this whole shadow over everything she'd accomplished.
Right. The positive test for meldonium, a heart medication that was recently added to the banned substances list. This is where things get really complicated.
So she said she'd been taking it for years for medical reasons and didn't know it had been banned. But then you have this whole debate about whether meldonium actually enhances performance and the timing of the ban itself. It was all just really murky.
And this is where we really want you, the listener, to think critically. It's easy to jump to conclusions, but there's a lot to unpack here. Meldonium, the timing, Sharapova's explanation, it's messy. What are your thoughts on it? It really is a complex situation with no easy answers, but it brings up some big questions about how we view athletes and what we expect from them.
Yeah, for sure. It's easy to get caught up in the controversy, but let's not forget about all the incredible moments in her career, like her amazing run at the 2012 French Open. That's where she completed the career Grand Slam, proving she could adapt and conquer any surface.
It's one thing to dominate on fast surfaces like grass and hard courts. But clay is a whole different animal. She had to completely rethink her game, develop more patience, add more variety. Winning on clay like that was a testament to her work ethic and her desire to constantly improve.
It really shows how she wasn't content with just being good. She wanted to be great, and she was willing to put in the work. And speaking of putting in the work, we have to mention her incredible mental toughness, especially in those marathon matches. Remember that Australian Open final against Annie Ivanovic in 2000?
Oh, absolutely. Over 4 hours of intense back-and-forth tennis. A real roller coaster of emotions. She saved match points, fought back from a set down, and ultimately came out on top. Talk about resilience and determination. That match was classic Sharapova.
It's those moments that make you really appreciate her as a competitor. And you can't talk about Sharapova without talking about her rivalry with Serena Williams, right? That was one of the most compelling storylines in tennis for over a decade.
Definitely. Their matches were always must-see TV.
Yeah.
So much intensity and drama, you never knew what was going to happen. And even though Sharapova didn't win many of those battles, she always pushed Serena to her limits.
And even in defeat, she always handled herself with such class and grace. There was always a sense of mutual respect between them, even amidst the fierce competition. But let's circle back to the Hall of Fame debate. After looking at all of this, where do you land? Does Sharapova deserve this honor?
It's a tough one, honestly.
Yeah.
On one hand, you can't deny her achievements. Those 5 Grand Slam titles, the career Grand Slam 21 weeks at number 1. She dominated the sport for a significant period.
But then there's that doping violation,
Yeah,
which is impossible to ignore. It definitely complicates things.
it really does.
Yeah.
It forces us to think about what we truly value in our athletes. Do we prioritize talent and achievement above all else? Or do we hold them to a higher standard of conduct, both on and off the court?
Those are questions that go beyond just tennis, don't they? They apply to all sports, even to society as a whole. How do we reconcile someone's successes with their mistakes?
What's fascinating is that Sharapova's induction forces us to confront these questions head-on. There are no easy answers, no black and white solutions. It's a conversation we need to have. And there are valid points to be made on both sides.
It's a reminder that our heroes are athletes. They're human beings just like us. They're capable of incredible things, but they're also capable of making mistakes.
Absolutely. And how we choose to judge those mistakes, how we weigh them against their accomplishments, ultimately reflects our own values and beliefs. It's personal. So what does all of this mean for you, the listener?
It means you get to decide what criteria are most important to you when you think about an athlete's legacy. Do their on-court accomplishments stand alone? Or do you factor in their character, their actions off the court, how they handle themselves under pressure?
There's no right or wrong answer, but it's an important question to consider. And Sharapova's induction provides a unique opportunity to really dive into that conversation. It's about more than just tennis. It's about how we view success failure and what it means to be a role model.
No matter what side of the Hall of Fame debate you're on, you can't deny the impact Sharapova had on tennis. She was a fierce competitor, a global icon, and a figure who definitely sparked some strong reactions, both positive and negative.
Her story is a reminder that even our most celebrated athletes are complex. They're capable of greatness, but also flaws. And it's up to each of us to figure out how we reconcile those two sides.
Well said. And on that note, let's take a quick pause before we move into the final part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still some interesting angles to explore.
It really is a complex situation.
Yeah.
No easy answers. But it raises some important questions about how we view athletes and what we expect from them.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in all the controversy, but let's not forget about those incredible moments in her career. Like her run at the 2012 French Open. She completed the career Grand Slam there, proving she could adapt to and conquer any surface.
Yeah, it's one thing to dominate on fast surfaces like grass and hard courts.
Yeah.
But clay is a whole different animal. She had to completely change her game, more patience, more variety. Winning on clay like that shows her work ethic and her desire to constantly improve.
She wasn't content with just being good. She wanted to be great, and she was willing to put in the work to make it happen. And speaking of putting in the work, we have to talk about her mental toughness, especially in those marathon matches. Remember that Australian Open final against Ana Ivanovic back in 2008?
Oh yeah, for sure. Over 4 hours. Just intense back and forth tennis. It was a real roller coaster. She saved match points, fought back from a set down, and in the end she came out on top. Talk about resilience and determination. That was classic Sharapova.
Those are the moments that make you appreciate her as a competitor. And we can't talk about Sharapova without talking about Serena Williams, can we? That rivalry was one of the biggest storylines in tennis for over a decade.
Absolutely. Those matches were must-see TV.
Yeah.
So much intensity, so much drama. And even though Sharapova didn't win a lot of them, she always pushed Serena.
And she always handled herself with class. Even in defeat, there was always this mutual respect between them, even with the fierce competition. But let's get back to the Hall of Fame debate. After everything we've talked about, where do you stand? Does Sharapova deserve to be in the Hall of Fame?
It's tough. On the one hand, she achieved so much. 5 Grand Slam titles, the career Grand Slam, 21 weeks at number 1. She was dominant for a long time.
But then you have the doping violation. It's hard to ignore.
Yeah, it definitely complicates things. It makes us think about what we really value in our athletes. Do we just care about talent and results, or do we hold them to a higher standard of conduct, on and off the court?
I think those are questions that go way beyond tennis. They apply to all sports and even society as a whole. How do we deal with someone's successes and their mistakes?
It's fascinating that Sharapova's induction makes us confront these questions. There are no easy answers. It's a conversation we need to keep having. There are valid points on both sides.
It reminds us that these athletes, these heroes, they're human just like us. They can do amazing things, but they can also make mistakes.
Exactly. And how we judge those mistakes, how much weight we give them compared to their achievements, it all comes down to our own values and beliefs. It's a personal thing. So what does it all mean for you, the listener?
Well, I think it means you get to decide what matters most when you're thinking about an athlete's legacy. Are their achievements on the court enough? Or do you also consider their character, their actions off the court, how they handled the pressure?
There's no right or wrong answer. But it's a question worth asking. And Sharapova's induction gives us a chance to really think about it. It's not just about tennis. It's about success and failure and what it means to be a role model.
Yeah, no matter where you stand on the Hall of Fame debate, you can't argue with the impact Sharapova had. She was a competitor, an icon,
Yeah.
and someone who definitely got people talking, good and bad.
Her story reminds us that even our biggest stars are complex. They're capable of amazing things, but they have flaws too, and it's up to each of us to decide how we deal with that.
Well said. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back for the final part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot, but there are still some interesting things to talk about. All right, we're back for the last part of our deep dive into Maria Sharapova's career and her Hall of Fame induction.
We've talked about the big wins, the controversies, and what her journey tells us about being a champion today.
Yeah, now let's go back to something we talked about earlier, those on-court rituals. The fist clenching, the walk to the back fence, the stare.
Oh yeah, they're iconic. Almost as famous as her ground strokes. They definitely got people talking. Some thought it was all gamesmanship. A way to psych out her opponents and mess with their rhythm.
And others saw it as pure focus and determination. Like she was blocking everything out, just locking into her game plan.
And there's no denying it added to the drama. It wasn't just a tennis match, it was a performance.
It's interesting how those rituals changed over time. They became more and more noticeable as her career went on.
You could see it as a way of dealing with the pressure, the expectations, and the intensity of competing at that level.
And they definitely made her stand out. You could spot Sharapova from anywhere just by those mannerisms.
She wasn't afraid to be different, to embrace what made her unique, and that connected with people, even those who weren't big tennis fans.
She became a global icon, a brand. It went way beyond the sport. Magazine covers, endorsements, her own business.
It shows that athletes can be more than just competitors. They can be role models, entrepreneurs, influencers.
And Sharapova was all of that. Now with her Hall of Fame induction, she's starting a whole new chapter.
A chapter that will probably keep people talking for years to come.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a few things to think about. Does Maria Sharapova being in the Hall of Fame make it less prestigious? Or does it make it more prestigious? How should organizations deal with doping violations when they're thinking about an athlete's whole career?
Tough questions for sure. But keep thinking about it, keep talking about it, form your own opinions. That's what makes these deep dives so interesting. They make us think critically, question what we believe, and look at things from different angles.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through Maria Sharapova's career. It was remarkable and sometimes controversial. Hopefully you learned something new, had some aha moments, and maybe even changed your perspective a bit.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.